Hi guys, my name is Matti Sulanto, and in this video I want to talk about some things that are impossible to fix in post. Before I get started, remember to sign up for my monthly newsletter and also remember to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already done so. I'll fix it in post is a phrase that we hear a lot these days. And it's true that we can fix some things in post pretty easily and without any major loss in image quality. Especially if you shoot raw, you can do whatever you want with your white balance without any loss in image quality. And you can also fix your exposure pretty well unless your exposure is way off. If your exposure is like several stops under or several stops over, then you may not be able to recover or fix it in post. But if you're just a little bit off with your exposure, you can fix that in post without any major loss in image quality. And you can also fix your framing and composition in post unless they are way off. If your framing is too tight, obviously you can't have something in the frame that was left out at the time of pressing the shutter. And if your framing is way too loose, there's too much empty space or too much stuff in the frame, you're gonna have to crop a lot, and therefore you lose a lot of pixels when you crop, and therefore you will kind of lose some of the image quality also in the process. So you can fix quite a lot in post, and I think most of us actually fine-tune all of those things just a little bit, at least in post. A little bit of exposure, a little bit of framing, a little bit of white balance, fine tuning and all that. It's quite normal actually. But there are at least 4 things that are pretty much impossible to fix in post. And the first one is the focus. If your focus is way off and the whole picture is just one bokeh, obviously you can't make it sharp. There's no way you can do that. And it's also possible that the picture is sharp, but the sharpness is not at the right place. Maybe your subject is in the foreground, but somehow you managed to focus in the background. And that can be also pretty much impossible to fix in post. But if you manage to focus on your main subject, but the focus is just a little bit off, that may be possible to fix in post if you are not going to use the picture in very big size or you are not going to print it very large. Just add some sharpness and you may get away with it. All camera manufacturers work very hard to get us perfectly focused pictures. And for example, Lumix cameras have a feature called post focus. When you activate the post focus, the camera will take several images at different focusing distances in a very short burst. And then afterwards you can choose the picture that's right for you. It's not perfect though, it only shoots JPEG, but still it may be a lifesaver for somebody who is not very experienced with his or her camera. And the second mistake you can't fix in post is camera shake. If your shutter speed is too long and you're not careful with your camera, you'll end up with a shaken picture. And it's pretty much impossible to fix in post. Many cameras these days have very powerful image stabilizer, and the stabilizer on Lumix cameras is one of the best. But it's still possible to get camera shake if your shutter speed is too long and you are not holding your camera properly. And to avoid that, it's important to check the shutter speed and try to keep the camera as steady as possible when you press the shutter. The third mistake that is impossible to fix in post is motion blur. Sometimes motion blur is intentional. You want to have something blurry in the picture or something moving, maybe to give the impression of speed or movement. But if that's unintentional, you would like everything to be like frozen in the picture, but there is some movement, then it's impossible to fix in post. And if you want to freeze every movement in the picture, you just have to have fast enough shutter speed. And that's good to remember because, like I said, you can't fix that in post. And the fourth mistake that is impossible to fix in post is the depth of field. If you have too much depth of field, you may be able to somehow fix it, at least partly fix it, by adding some blur to some parts of the picture, but it's not gonna look the same as the real shallow depth of field. Some blur filters are really good these days, but if you really want that shallow depth of field look in your picture, it's best to use wide aperture to get that for real. Because if you try to add it in post, it doesn't look as good. But if you don't have enough depth of field in your picture, then it's almost impossible to add it in post. If your background or foreground is totally blurry, you can't make it sharp in post. It's impossible. So it's important to select the correct aperture at the time of pressing the shutter. So let me recap this really fast. These are the things you have to get right when you press the shutter. Focus. Your focus has to be on your main subject. Your shutter speed. If you want to freeze the motion and prevent the camera shake, you have to have fast enough shutter speed. But if you want to show some motion blur, or maybe you even want to show some camera shake, then you have to have slow enough shutter speed. And then you have to get the right select the right aperture to get the right amount of depth of field in your picture, the amount that you want. And of course it makes sense to get also the exposure right and the composition and the framing, but those you can tweak in post without any major image quality loss or any major issues if you get them about right when you press the shutter. Anyway, that's all this time. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.